Hi, my name is Ken Asserson. I wrote the microbiome prescription website, and there is a new, significant size database which could be of interest for people who are dealing with autism, chronic fatigue symptom, long COVID, and a ton of other conditions. But this is far more oriented towards the researcher, the academics, or those who are involved in actually doing microbiome analysis. And the main, I'll explain at the end how we do it and why it came up, etc. But if you go to the R2 microbiome prescription dot site, you'll see there's a new one which says metabolic odds ratio by symptoms. Okay, if we click that, it will go and show a chemical like NADPH, and it will now show a variety of conditions where we have significant odds depending on something whether or not this is present. Then the odds of having, for example, mental confusion is about 44. If it's not present, then the odds is very low. So in other words, the presence of this chemical metabolite is an indicator of having that, and basically the probability of it is 0.001. But you don't want to go and do just look at one and have that definitive. It is all of them in combination. The classic example I'll use is a person an illegal resident or a criminal. You could base it on a simple thing like, oh, he looks Mexican. Well, he may be Native um, American or something else, and he may be actually third generation. So you can't go for just a single indicator and fly with that, or you shouldn't, for mildly. I know some political groups tend to. So what I'm going to do is I mentioned two things in particular. I'll mention, let's go look at CFS. Ah, there it is. And we have it. Ah, if you have above 4%, then the odds you having it is about 2.8. Slight increased odds. If you don't have that much, the odds are decreased. So excessive amount above the 4th percentile, and we'll come back to why I'm using percentile, not actual values. Percentiles are transferable between different lab results because although they calculate things differently and their raw percentages may be different, the percentiles should follow the same pattern. So let's go over and look over it at MECFS, and we have 2,000 different metabolites involved. Now, I'm going to take a look for one of those which I know. Um, see, is there, and the chemical tetracycline, and now and there's actually more of them. And here where the fun is, tetracycline is a metabolite which occurs naturally in the body, but also it is a available antibiotic. And what do we have? If it is present, then the odds are pretty low of having chronic fatigue syndrome. If it's not present, the odds are high. And lo and behold, what we find from studies from a variety of people out there, and a good number of them, that tetracycline improves chronic fatigue syndrome. Oh, wait a minute, you mean this is saying that tetracycline, giving it as a substitute for natural current tetracycline improves it? And yes, it does. And there it is, and it shifts the odds. So it is sort of a little bit of a interesting, what? Wait a minute, it makes sense. Let's look at a different antibiotic, like the penicillin. And what do we find? We find that, like actually, two of them, if you have a small amount, okay, but what we have is certain types of penicillin N. If you have a, if you don't have any showing up, your odds goes up for having chronic fatigue syndrome. And one particular form you need to be over 2% to have reduced odds. So it's not an absolutely clean there, and we're going to go and try one more and see if we're lucky with that one. Ah, streptomycin. Again, notice below that is not for a is present means not having any showing up increases your odds. So you got a whole bunch of natural antibiotics which are often used by some clinical physicians dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome, saying, "Wait a minute, guess what? You don't have any, and you take some antibiotic and you improve." And why? Because the problem is you are missing these naturally occurring probiotics. Now, you could say, okay, so which bacteria do I need to modify in order to produce that? That is a slightly more complicated issue, which I'm not going to address with in this video. What I wanted to do is just simply show, wait a minute, this is sort of interesting. Now, let's go over and my other thing I indicated, which is autism. Let's see if we find anything for autism. Oops. Nothing for autism for that particular one. Okay, and let's go back and see what we can find for autism. So I went back and went and said, wait a minute, I'm looking for autism. It's not there. And that means that the metabolite profile seen with autism does not have, okay, that, rephrase it, autism doesn't have significant metabolic shifts involved with it, which is interesting. Now, I may be premature for this because where at the time of doing this video, all the computation have not finished. The computation literally takes several days, and there's a good chance it won't. But we do have other things besides autism, for example, histamine or mast cell issue. And there we have all of the things which increase or decrease. And again, we could go and take a look at something like the tetracycline. And tetracycline, the absence of it, again, we have increased odds, which is not totally unexpected since histamine mast cell often is connected with chronic fatigue syndrome or derivatives of that. So what we have here is a relatively interesting way to explore what is causing something and ideally start working on how to do that. For example, slowness of thought. We have, again, we have 2,000 different things which are statistically significant. Remember, these pages are sortable, so if you can click here and we see here in this case we see percentile being 0, not is present. Basically, if you at the lowest percentile or you have none, then these are the odds. And we can also sort there if we want, and we basically find that it is basically a binary type of system. Basically, present or absence indicates whether or not the odds goes up or down, and the amount is relatively insignificant, which I deal with within the article. Ringing in the ears. Okay, let's see if what we have here. Again, it is another binary one, and we have the chemical salt. But notice, we don't have 2,000, we have only 300. So it is a much, much reduced number of metabolited shifts for here. And let's check our old friend tetracycline. And hey, tetracycline isn't involved in that. So we have a different scenario. Again, the whole purpose of this is to make the data available. Now, what I want to do, particularly for people who are researcher, is to notice this little JSON download over all probabilities. And probability is calculated from something called a chi-square. What it's showing is P01. But if you want to get all the data, you get all the data there. And it's, first of all, licensing. This is proprietary data, but it may be used as long as you acknowledge it. And there's a copyright by my consulting company on this one. And then we have the name of the symptoms, ringing in the ear, and then we have the metabolite information, CPID, etc. We have the percentile is what percentile is where the threshold is, the above and below, and then we have how many people in our uploaded sample have just metabolites and the symptom. So some cases it's high for one, like down here we have 80, other cases it's low, and I leave it to your statistician to determine which ones are, quote, significant enough for your purposes, because that is a subjective value. It's chi-square, and generally chi-square is significant when the expected count is 5 or more, and I think I implemented that in my algorithm. So there is that, and yes, actually I did implement that in the algorithm. Okay, so that's it. Now let's stop and go over to the backstory. Okay, the link page is my blog post on this one, which also contained there, and basically I'll walk through what I found because I deal with multiple different lab results, and there is disagreement from one lab to another as to which bacteria is there, how much you have, etc. It's the root cause is a lack of standardization. But here's where we hit a little bit of an interesting side effect. The bacteria naming is done by looking at the RNA sequence of the metabolites. And there it's trying to match things up best. When you take how they match the RNA sequence to bacteria, the RNA sequence also matched to metabolites using a KEGG database, which is a absolutely lovely site. And I'll just go over there and let's go over to KEGG And there we have the encyclopedia and each address, keg.jp, that's it. And it gives you tons of information. And I have extracted some of that information to use. So what we have is that when you look at metabolites, although from the bacteria using however they identify the bacteria, we end up finding that we have convergence of which metabolites are associated with which symptoms, despite the fact that we're using different lab processings which are claiming different bacteria entirely. So it's how to say, almost a backdoor way of getting the metabolites and consistency across labs is simply because the labs identified by RNA, the metabolites are a result of the RNA, and the RNA they identify one way still matches up with the metabolites another way in terms of the sequencing for the RNA, which means suddenly the metabolites are wonderful. So um, we have around 4,500 symptom annotated samples from monocyte and this process one. We not all right. I'm not going to get into the mess of doing it, but basically what we do is very simple. We calculate for every one of those samples all the metabolites, and we have 2,700 metabolites being possible and often being counted for each there. You may only get 800 bacteria, but you get 2,700 metabolites. So there's sort of this explosion. And now we convert the metabolites for each sample into percentile ranking across all the monocytes. Why percentile rank? Why not just have how much it is? The reason is simple. Somebody doing a different way may get different absolute numeric value, different percentages of each metabolite if you want. But if you convert it to percentile ranking, chances are the percentile ranking are going to be very close, no matter how you calculate the metabolite amounts. So it simply makes it much easier or much more likely that we can just take the data being produced here, plug it into a different pipeline which produces different metabolic analysis of a microbiome sample, and the data is reasonably reliably usable, to be determined by people actually trying it, which I hope people will. Okay, now that we get percentile ranking, we basically calculate the chi-square for every integer percentile rank, which is actually is 101, because the 101 is nothing was seen. And often that shows up as the case, as in present or not present was statistically significant. And we look for the best odds, and what we end up is we got 55 million try computation. Those computation means we have to locate the data, download it, put it into our array, do computations, and come up with whatever the chi-square want. And for the sake of argument, I set a p of 0.001, which is a very respectable probability, or translating the chi-square is 10.83, and the downloadable data is in chi-squared, because it was actually the easiest, laziest way of doing it. I'm a good developer. I'm lazy. And then if we get chi-square being significant, when we go look for the best chi-square for a particular metabolite for a particular symptom, we then compute the odds ratio for it. Next thing is for those who feel game are going out and doing it themselves. Well, here is a snapshot image of the CPU I'm doing on it. I'm doing parallel processing, and as you see, I'm walloping the CPU at 100% constantly, 8 different cores, and we're actually doing some overclocking, so we have a rather ugly amount, and the actual count is actually not 150,000, it is closer to 180,000 at the moment, and the process is still going. I just wanted to get this video ready ahead of time. Okay, now using odds ratio, it's the same aspect, identifying criminals or illegal aliens. You can't work from one magical characteristic or aspect. You have to look at all the data available to make a determination. Here is an example where we see some pretty high odds ratio, and you notice the percentiles are there. Oh, okay, so we pick one of them and run with that. And you could, but if you look at two of them, suddenly instead of being one is above the percentile, one is below the percentile, you find that there is no major risk. This is simply a word of caution about trying to be lazy and reduce things to too few metabolites. You can do it, but the odds ratio is a little bit more unlikely to be accurate. So you got more fuzziness being produced in it. Okay, now um, the other scenario we have is where we have is present, and everything is present or not present, or zero, which is almost the same. And what people say look at is a little bit of confusion about saying that. I don't, because guess what? I've taught artificial intelligence at university. I've worked with AI for a variety of firms, including Verizon, Starbucks, Amazon, particularly Amazon, and oh, I look at it and say, oh, perfect, data is ready to rumble with, and there's a whole bunch of machine learning or AI approaches which loves this type of data, absolutely love it, which means, hey, okay, you can use it progressively. Now we come to the last little bit of pain, which is clinical use basically is no. So if you are practicing MD, this is likely to have very little easy use. If you're a researcher, it has great search because it will point you at looking at certain metabolites as being critical and perhaps needing more investigation or more digging into things. So, simple example which I gave earlier, which is for tetracycline, and we see that with tetracycline, if you have none of being reduced as a metabolite, your odds jump significantly. And we saw that for several other natural antibiotics. If you're missing it, your odds of having chronic fatigue syndrome go up. In other words, the absence of naturally occurring antibiotics suggests that some specific antibiotics could be tried, and ideally you want to work for antibiotics which are in the metabolites, the KEG thing, which are available because that gives you the best evidence base for giving a trial for it. Now you may say, okay, let's go to do same approach with probiotics. There we run into a problem because basically probiotics are generally sold on a species level or not a strain, and even a strain level, if you are lucky enough to get strain, most of the time you won't find detail. In my reading through the years, I found one absolutely beautiful chart showing how different strains of Lactobacillus reuteri have produces high or low reuteri, folate, or histamine. Reuteri is a natural occurring antibiotic, and as you see, it's there. And the question is, okay, you buy Lactobacillus reuteri off your health food store, and you get sick because the manufacturer happens to use a Lactobacillus reuteri which originated in a pig, which they didn't care about the origin because lactobacillus was a magic word to use. And hey, somebody offered lactobacillus reuteri probiotics, so they purchased them and resell them. As you can see, a pig one is very likely to produce histamines, in which case, guess what? You get histamine reaction from it. You have a whole bunch of symptoms being worse. Alternatively, if you take a rodent one, you don't see much histamine. You see it supplements folate. Ah, so the problem is that you have to know exactly what a probiotic produces, not at the species level, but the explicit strain. And that right now is a major, major problem in terms of what is available on the market. Okay, so with that said, basically go to the site and then whatever symptom you're interested in, you can go down and take a look at it. As we saw, autism is on the list, which is interesting. Pets are, but not autism, at least at the moment. Again, it's conditional because the processing hasn't finished, and so there's a chance it may show up at the end. But what we have here is the nature results. Now, I will be recalculating this table probably once every 2 months. I need to give my big server a bit of a rest. Besides, the room gets hot from the CPU running so hot. So look for whatever you're interested in, and you can go and see how many. Some cases just about anything is. Other cases like there we have less. Some cases it's only 100 or 200 items. Like dry mouth, I think was one of these. No, but it wasn't. High anxiety. High anxiety. Only 382 metabolites are connected with it, which is sort of nice. But now you can see which one it is. You can go and start looking for things which are there, and you could start. Often the best way is things with the highest odd ratio and see what is there because the highest odds ratio is basically what you want to do. Or you could do the other way and oops, low odds. So it's basically below odds. So that is where most of the thing is. You can look at also percentiles and back and forth. Again, some cases it's going to be is present for everything, or is present and then you get a few with zeros or ones. Remember, we're dealing with percentile, which is almost the same as being is present, and then you get odds ratio. And in this case, basically, the presence of any of those substances causes high. The absence of those substances causes high anxiety, and there's nothing which does reverse, which is what we want is something which, if we somehow supplement it, it would decrease anxiety. Actually, correction. Here you have to work it. Okay, if this one is present, then the odds of having anxiety is there. If the substance is not present, then the odds is a whopping 25 times more likely that you have anxiety. So what you have here is a list of metabolites, which if you can somehow obtain them by one way, perhaps they happen to be an amino acid, then chances are you will reduce your anxiety level. Okay, I think this is long enough for this video. There is a mountain, literally mountain of data, and you are going to be working in it for a while. Take your time learning it, and just remember that percentile, above and below odds are there. And you can say, okay, how accurate it is? Well, you can take a look at the symptom count in terms of how much data is being used to compute it. So, with that being said, I am signing off.